Are you ready for a storm to hit the Dallas housing market? Well, in this video, we're going to talk about Dallas's decision to ban short-term rentals and how this could upend the entire Dallas housing market. Well, hello, this is Wendy Pinnell, and after an all-out battle between the Dallas Short-Term Rental Alliance versus the Texas Neighborhood Coalition, the City Council finally voted to completely ban all short-term rentals in single-family neighborhoods. Jason Bieferman reports that basically the City Council voted to change the definition of lodging to include STRs. He continues, the designation means they're labeled as similar to hotels and it restricts them from single-family areas. Okay, well, that leads to another question. What does Dallas consider to be a short-term rental? Well, the city's definition of a short-term rental is any residential property or part of a property rented for 30 days or less. This means that any owner in Dallas who decides to rent out their property for a period of less than a month falls under this category. The council has made it clear that short-term rentals are now only going to be permitted in multifamily zoned areas. Now, in terms of enforcement, Everton Bailey reports that it could take at least 6 months before the department is ready to enforce the new rules, and it would be heavily based on responding to complaints. If you search on Airbnb for properties available in Dallas, you would still find a lot of listings. However, plenty of these listings have already transitioned to being apartments, and those fall under the multifamily zoning category, so that's permitted. Now, this news has certainly not been welcomed by everyone. In fact, when the news broke, you had it all over social media. Like one user wrote, "This is absolutely absurd. How can they just make this decision without even considering the impact on those already in the short-term rental industry?" But of course, then you had other users who felt the move was very necessary. They said, "I live in a single-family area, and the amount of noise and traffic that comes with short-term rentals is simply unbearable. I'm glad the council has finally taken this step." So lots of strong feelings all around, right? But let's talk about the fallout. All right, first of all, let's talk about the economy. You're going to feel some retraction from this change within the city of Dallas. Your short-term rental property owners are going to have to make some changes. You have these super large companies operating hundreds of houses to, the mom and pops who are renting out the apartment over the garage. Now, obviously, these owners are losing a source of income. Not only that, but some of them may have already invested heavily in their properties to make them rentable. This ban is not just causing them to lose their source of income, it's also forcing them to rethink their investment. Also, all your vacationers and relocators are going to be affected by the ban. These properties are often going to be your more affordable option than hotels. Plus in general, they're more practical, right? For more traveling, with your family or your friends. Now, if this happened in a vacuum, we'd probably see hotels becoming far more profitable and then economic contraction in other areas, such as entertainment, because after all, right, there's only so many places you can spend the same dollars. But that being said, we still have cities in the Dallas area that allow short-term rentals. So I think if anything, those places just became more profitable. Also though, think about the effect in the employment sector. There are a lot of workers who are going to be out of a job. We're talking cleaners, landscapers, maintenance crews, handymen. You have to have these jobs to take care of these properties, and the ripple effects of this stream of income disappearing is going to extend to workers who depend on these jobs, right? They're trying to support themselves, their families. Now, for the Airbnb host in Dallas, you've got some decisions to make, okay? I think the general assumption is that you only have two choices, right? You either have to sell or you have to lease, but it's not quite as limiting as that. There are a lot of different ways you can treat a single family home. Here's a personal example. When Dale's mom developed Alzheimer's, we were able to buy the home next door and had caregivers come in to help. Now, one of the caregivers suggested turning the home into an adult care home. She was saying what you would do is you would hire a person to live there as the caregiver and bring in other people needing care. Could end up being a really lucrative business. Well, what we ended up doing, we ended up going a different route. Okay, we simply rented out the rooms. We found multiple people who were more than happy to rent a room plus the use of the common areas for $500 a month. So those are a few options. But also, if you're near the airport, you can make your rental into a crash pad. It's a way to provide affordable housing for pilots, and flight attendants and that sort of thing. Basically, they pay like, $300 a month to, essentially own a bed and use the common areas. But in spite of all of these options, if we end up with a high volume of owners leasing out their homes or putting them up for sale, we're going to see that impact the housing market. Now, depending on who you talk to or which video you watch, you're going to hear everything from, it won't have any effect to, it's going to flood the market and lead to mass foreclosures. I don't mean to be, cynical here, but pretty much the realtors that want your listings are going to tell you to get out while you can. And the ones who want you to buy now, they're going to tell you, don't wait. It's not going to impact the market anyway. But being purely rational, before we can evaluate impact, we need to evaluate exposure, right? So the city of Dallas reports that about 1,800 properties were registered as of May, and the city estimates another 1,300 could be operating in Dallas. Okay, so even Dallas is acknowledging not everyone is minding their P's and Q's and registering like they're supposed to. Now, inside Airbnb.com, okay, that's a third-party website, and it cites 5,592 listings. Now, keep in mind, sometimes the listing is an apartment over a garage, or it could just be renting out a room. Also, Airbnb reports the data behind the inside Airbnb site is sourced from publicly available information from the Airbnb site. Now let's talk about airdna.com. They report, at our core, there are two major categories of data that power AirDNA's analytics: scraped data and partner data. They pull the scraped data from Airbnb and VRBO and the partner data from property managers and individual hosts. So we can already tell, okay, the AirDNA will be more accurate because it uses more sources for its data. So they state, because we analyze both scraped and source data, we're confident that AirDNA provides the most accurate vacation rental data in the world. All right, so we've established that. So what does AirDNA report about Dallas? Well, they report 5,538 active rentals in Dallas, 89% of which are the entire home for lease, so not just a room. If 89% of each of those listings were a whole house, that leaves us with 4,928 entire homes currently listed as short-term rentals in Dallas. Now, when you look down a little further though, on the site, you'll see that it lists rental sizes, with only 31% of the rentals having at least 3 bedrooms or more. All right, so that tells us in Dallas we have a lot of condos, a lot of apartments, or that sort of thing that's being listed. So what you're typically going to see in Dallas as a single family home is like 3 bedrooms. So if you're thinking about this in terms of exposure to the single family housing market, we're gonna be thinking about those 3-bedroom homes, right? So we're talking about 31% of 4,928 homes. So we end up roughly with 1,527 single family homes with that exposure. Now let's talk about how that's gonna affect both the rental and sales housing market. As I was reviewing the data, I find I'm far more concerned with the impact on the rental market than the housing market. New rental listings are up in Dallas with 6,543 new listings this month, as compared to 4,978 listings last year at the same time. Okay, now this goes along with what Dallas Morning News reported, that Stephen Brown reports that North Texas apartment construction surged to a new high. He goes on to explain that more than 74,000 apartments were being built in that area at the end of the quarter. And that's up from 65,462 units at the end of 2022. RealPage chief economist Jay Parsons chimes in as well. He says it's the biggest construction number since we've tracked it, starting in 1992. In fact, he continues, DFW leads the country in apartment development with 34,345 units scheduled to complete in 2023. So in the rental market, completely independent of the Airbnbs, we're seeing an enormous amount of inventory added. Now, we know 300 people a day are moving into Dallas, right? But that's still a lot of high density housing hitting the rental market. I suspect we're already going to be challenged with absorption, and Airbnb conversions are just going to add to that. Now let's turn the corner and talk about how this is going to affect the housing market. We're talking about two different kinds of sellers here, right? One has equity and one doesn't. We're going to run into some Airbnb hosts who are over leveraged. If they owe more on their home than what it's worth, they're not going to be able to sell. A long-term lease is not the cash flowing animal that a successful Airbnb can be. So we may very well see some foreclosures spike up as we get closer to December when that enforcement period comes into play. Now, our seller with equity is in a different position, right? They can successfully list their home, and they're going to bring inventory to the market. So let's have a conversation about inventory. There are two half-truths you're typically going to hear when we talk about homes for sale. This is what you need to know. We are not in a typical housing market. You may hear some say that Dallas only has, a 2.4 month supply of housing and therefore we are in a seller's market. Well, just looking around and experiencing the market as a giant whole, okay, we're talking about like the entire Metroplex, we know that's not true. And this is why the whole seller's market statistic is not accurate, because we don't have normal demand. 2.4 months of housing supply in a market with ordinary demand is completely different than 2.4 months supply where demand is abysmal. Dallas right now is full of shadow buyers who would love to enter the market, but they just can't afford it. So they sit on their existing homes or they continue living with their parents, right? So the 2.4 month supply does not equate to a seller's market being in charge and calling all the shots. So if you hear, 1,500 homes being added to the market won't make a difference because we're already in a seller's market, well, I just wouldn't take that as gospel, okay? Because yes, we do indeed have less inventory than usual right now, but at the same time, we also have less demand. Secondly, when the trends data shows their month supply, this is all based on MLS data. So remember how we compared the AirDNA site to Inside Airbnb? Well, AirDNA used multiple data sources, whereas Airbnb only used the one. Well, the same is true with the MLS trends. It is only using MLS data. Okay, so what's not on there? Well, the hundreds of thousands of new construction homes that never make it to the MLS. Knock.com reports that Dallas leads the nation in new construction starts. I know more than just a smattering of new construction homes make it onto the MLS, but there are just so many that don't. Now, as an example, we were negotiating a sales contract in McKinney, and the builder said they had sold 160 homes in the past 90 days. Hey, not a one of them was on MLS for me to track sales data. I asked her if she would release the sales data to me in order to justify her sales price, and she flat out told me no. She said she wasn't going to release that data because it's their business if they want to raise prices. So right there you have 160 homes in one subdivision that never made it to the MLS and consequently never made it into the trends data. Okay, so given those two half-truths, where do we actually stand with inventory? Do we have a supply shortage or do we have an oversupply? Well, the answer to that is yes, to both. The situation is super micro-local. There are hotspots in Dallas, such as that one in McKinney, where they are raising their prices monthly. And why is that? Because the subdivision is in a top school district, so they can. At the end of the day, a high-quality buyer is going to be willing to pay for a high-quality education for their children. In some of our A-plus school districts, like Prosper and Frisco, for example, we have a supply shortage and sellers are raising their prices. In other areas, we are absolutely seeing an oversupply. Okay, you want to know how I know? Well, because I am bombarded with emails constantly from builders. I received probably 75 emails just today from builders offering this and that discount and incentive and realtor bonus. If the supply shortage was uniform, okay, like if it was all like that one McKinney builder, well, I'd have a much cleaner inbox, okay, I can tell you that much. Now, one thing about the city of Dallas, if we want to drill down to be that micro-local, it doesn't have the new construction like we see in our outer suburbs. Okay, it's landlocked. Okay, that makes sense, right? Now, why would that be relevant? Because that is where supply is coming from right now. With existing homes, you have homeowners sitting on a 3% interest rate. They don't want to sell their home and buy a new one with a 7% rate. So by and large, our cities that are landlocked all have really low inventory. In our current market, inventory is coming from new construction. So when Airbnbs start being listed for sale, unlike the rental situation, okay? This isn't gonna be inventory piling onto inventory. If Dallas had a ton of new construction, it would be. But remember, Dallas is landlocked with primarily pre-owned homes, and all those homeowners have mortgages with 3% interest. So from a very micro local perspective, Airbnb listings will be released into an inventory shortage. Because remember, we don't have new construction building up our supply in Dallas. So if we were talking about just the city of Dallas, inventory released into an inventory shortage should be absorbed. But of course, Dallas doesn't exist in a vacuum, so let's drill out a bit into surrounding suburbs where we are going to see an impact. Now, some of our surrounding suburbs have A+ schools and are in hot demand. Many of our suburbs are in B-rated schools that are not in nearly as much demand. So guess which ones are going to be impacted? Well, yes, the ones that are comparable. So by and large, Dallas doesn't have A+ rated schools. Any new listings it has, as our Airbnbers all start to sell, they're not even going to be considered by parents who insist on A+ schools. So no matter how many Airbnb listings hit the market, it's not really going to affect or be competitive with those A+ schools. Now, other suburbs that are comparable to the city of Dallas, such as those with lower school ratings and so on, okay, those are already going to be in less demand in the first place. So they may very well see price drops as inventory is added to the market. So where will we see an impact by all the Airbnbs hitting the market? In comparable areas. Not in your shiny A+ school areas, but very likely in your areas that are comparable to Dallas. Now let's talk about seasonality. If an Airbnb host knew he was gonna sell and knew anything about the market, he'd be selling right now. Okay, in summer, you're going to see stronger demand. Now, it's early yet, and the council's decision is still pretty new, but overall, we are not seeing a surge in homes for sale in Dallas. Listings are down 15.3% year over year. Then between May to June, we saw listings increase from 1,427 to just 1,444. Plus, we're not seeing a steep reduction in Dallas listings on Airbnb either. So I suspect what's gonna happen is our Dallas Airbnbers are gonna eke out every last bit of them they can get right, and then list in the fall. Now remember, they have until December before Dallas puts forth any kind of enforcement. So what happens every fall? When the kiddos go back to school, demand drops and so do prices. In fact, we have a lot of buyers here at home in Dallas that are waiting to enter the market in the fall because they know seasonality will do what seasonality always does. Prices go down in the fall when the kiddos go back to school. So these Airbnbers are going to enter the market right when prices are already beginning to drop. I mean, it could make for a very pleasant experience for our buyers, but you have to keep in mind it will be micro-local. You definitely have plenty of areas that are extremely short on inventory, and the Airbnb sellers are really not going to be enough to change demand in those areas, again, because those school ratings won't be comparable. Now, I realize this whole topic of seasonality may be completely foreign to you. If you'd like to know more about how it affects the fall housing market, I did an entire video about it, which you may want to watch right here. In the meantime, Wendy out.